Red alert! Charles locked the door to the room, in response to the angry reaction of the fired employee. The three key secretaries are called insects by Harry. The position, for which Charles had spent his whole life preparing, was suddenly his, when he delivered a well-considered and well-received speech to the nation, 24 hours after becoming king, in which he spoke of his loving mama, and pledged to serve the country with devotion, respect and love. It was plainly clear that he had plenty of time to think about it. While Charles was accepting the demands of his new position, many long-time employees of his found themselves accepting a different, less enjoyable challenge. They were out of a job, with the Queen at Buckingham Palace, Charles at Clarence House, and Prince William at Kensington Palace. The monarchy was transitioning from an organization with three distinct centers of authority to one with only two, the King's and William's. Redundancies were inevitable, but the abrupt manner in which the news was announced left many people with a bad taste in their mouths. 4 days into the time of formal mourning, letters notifying 100 Clarence House employees of potential layoffs were delivered. The late Queen's personal assistant at Buckingham Palace were likewise informed that they would lose their employment. Sir Clive Alderton, Charles's chief private secretary, wrote the note to the Clarence House staff, and said that he understood it would be upsetting news. A source reported, "Everyone including the top team and personal secretaries is utterly furious. To prepare for this, every member of the crew has been working late, every night since Thursday." It clearly shook the crowd. According to a different story, the king was not the target of the rage within the family. This is what occurs when the reins are changed. Two houses cannot be maintained, especially when the task the king will be performing is so fundamentally different, but the delivery and timing are inadequate. The treasures don't consider the human aspect of things. They simply consider the money cost. In order to accommodate as many employees as possible, Clarence House promised to look for alternate positions. Additionally, employees would be given improved redundancy payout. Negotiations over their departure, however, might be more difficult for some employees. Angela Kelly was the only person who was closest to the late Queen during her final years than anybody outside of her personal family. Kelly, who had formerly been Elizabeth's dresser, had evolved into much more. Kelly would tell people that she was essentially the Queen's caretaker. Her former title was personal assistant, advisor and curator to Her Majesty the Queen, jewelry, insignias, and wardrobe, but she was also her confidant friend, and the one who looked after her more than anyone else. She stayed at Windsor Castle, on the same floor as the Queen's personal quarters. In the Augusta Tower, Kelly believed that she would be able to live in her cottage in Windsor Home Park for the rest of her life, as promised. Once the Queen passed away, however, the palace's new configuration had different plans. Locks being changed in the Queen's apartments, barely days after her passing, was one of the first indications that the new government would adopt a tough stance. It quickly became apparent that Kelly's continued habitation of Her Grace and Favor mansion did not sit well with the powers that be. Following discussions, it was proposed that the king buy her house close to Sheffield, so she could be near her grandchildren. Following that, Kelly, 65, shared a photo of her garden on Instagram just before the coronation and said, "Getting ready to say goodbye. I am moving at last to my new home, which I will be able to call my home at last." In answer to a pal, she said, "I'm moving to the Peak District, just further on than Sheffield, so not far away from the family. My work phone has been disconnected, but hopefully you have this one. Looking forward to my new adventures." Another tweet alluded to her contentious interactions with some royal inmates. It appears that she had disagreements with other members of the family. Besides Prince Harry, she penned, "I am too old to worry about who likes me and who dislikes me. I have more important things to do. If you love me, I love you. If you support me, I support you. If you hate me, I don't care." When she passes away, the king will return. The new house he built for her in Yorkshire to the crown. A source replied, even if Angela wasn't everyone's cup of tea, the king didn't want to see her in need. I get the feeling that the king just didn't want her to be his neighbor. After the death of the queen, Kelly was not only the person to realize that her time was over. Since 2017, Sir Edward Young has served as the Queen's personal secretary, but he has no illusions about his future. Charles had his own man in Alderton, and after a brief transitional period, to ensure a smooth handover, during which Young and Alderton would both have the title of private secretary, with Alderton as principal private secretary, while Young with merely joint principal private secretary, just in case anyone did not realize who was really in charge. Young would eventually be on his way. 1 week after the coronation, on his last day at work, Alderton gave him a peerage and these kind words, "For nearly 20 years, Edward has been a wonderful friend and co-worker in the last years of the late Queen's reign, and in assisting with the changeover. He was a crucial asset. We will all miss him a great deal." Or, to put it in a different way, that Prince Harry would understand. The wasp had taken the place of the bee. Harry expressed his opinions regarding private secretaries in his biography, Spare Without Holding Back, when discussing his sentiments about the monarchical system and its flaws. Young Alderton and Simon Case, at the time Prince William's personal secretary, were his three targets of hatred. In his book, they are referred to respectively as the bee, the wasp and the fly. He does not make complimentary statements. The bee, he adds, was oval-faced and fuzzy, and tended to glide around with great equanimity and poise, as if he were a blessing to all living things. He was so composed that no one was afraid of him. Big error. Sometimes it's their final error. Simon Case Aka the fly came from No. 10 and would eventually hold the position of cabinet secretary. He had spent a large portion of his career adjacent to, and indeed drawn to shit. According to Harry, even though he acted differently, he relished eating the wormy innards of the government and the media, and became fat on them. However, Harry detested Alderton the most, which is ironic, considering that Harry gave him the finest moniker. When you could be the wasp, who would want to be the fly or the bee? Harry's pen picture of him, likewise, has a hint of perplexity. The wasp was lanky, endearing, haughty, and a bundle of jazz energy on the one hand, yet witty and humble on the other. However, Harry claims that Alderton would add your name to his list. If you ever pushed back on him, or disagreed with him, he would suddenly stab you with his enormous stinger, a short while later, causing you to cry out in shock. Where did that originate from anyway? It's all extremely funny, and for those who even have a passing familiarity with the courtiers in the palace, figuring out which courtier corresponds to which monogram may be amusing, but it's also a little bit too tidy. Harry never used those nicknames when he was still stationed in Britain. According to individuals who were there at the time, they bear the appearance of something Harry's ghost writer concocted to add excitement to the story. All of the references to the wormy intestines of the government and media seem more like the work of J.R. Moringer, who played that part, than it does of the prince. The three amigos were the monitor for the three confidential secretaries at the time. It had nothing to do with insects that eventually became perverted into the three ecos. They were the antagonists of the story, albeit perhaps not as effective as bee, fly and wasp as extended metaphor vehicles. What do you think of King Charles's decision to fire his staff, and the way Harry calls his father and brothers secretaries vulgar? Let us know your thoughts below in the comment section.